I speak to you in the name of the living God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Somehow I think there are really two things that I need to speak about today. One of them is this Sunday after the Ascension, to leave a thought about that with you, a brief one. And then to speak more directly about today's gospel and how it has some meaning for us. Most of us have the experience still of going to a letterbox or a community mailbox and picking up a piece of mail. And you know, one of the things we do when we pick up the piece of mail is look at the envelope to see where it's from. I had that experience this week, anticipating a refund from my electronically filed income tax. I expected to receive a notice that they had indeed indicated that I would receive the refund to which I was entitled. Unfortunately, the note that came in, it, surprisingly enough, was about when my next installment was due. Which shapes a little bit how I felt about that letter. Because expecting and understanding one thing from the context in which it arrived, find out that it really meant something else, was at least disappointing. The scriptures are like those things we find inside envelopes. They are messages. But we have to make sure when we read them that we read the envelope. The envelope for all of the stories of the ascension of Jesus was postmarked 2,000 years ago in Roman Palestine. And the address on the envelope shapes somewhat what we find in the message. If we open that envelope and see the stories that occur in the Gospels of Jesus on this middle plane of reality floating up to another plane of reality, we might give our heads a little shake and say, well, wait a minute, what's this about? Bishop Spong, an American Episcopal bishop in New Jersey, once pointed out that if Jesus ascended from a mountaintop at the speed of light, he would still not have reached the edge of the universe as we know it. That he would still be in time and space. So, how do we understand that today? And it seems to me, looking at that envelope, knowing that it comes from people who saw reality as being a three-level experience, us in the middle, heaven above, and the infernal regions, hell below, would have one understanding. And that our understanding, because we don't have that worldview, we don't share that envelope, would be somewhat different. But what matters is the message inside. And it seems to me the message of those scriptures about the ascension, whether you read them with a mindset that's 2,000 years old, or whether you read them with the mindset of somebody in the 21st century, what they mean is still the same. That Jesus, like us, born like us, died like us, in a world that existed 2,000 years ago, is no longer a prisoner of that time and space. That Jesus is as accessible to us today as he was to people who lived then. Week by week we gather to share the bread and wine of the Eucharist, believing wholly that Jesus is present with us at that gathering, just as surely as Jesus was present with those disciples of his at the first celebration of the Eucharist on the night before he was handed over to suffering and death. We understand, don't we, that what the gospel means applies just as surely today as it did then, even though we get the message in a different cultural envelope. This morning I think about people who, like us last week in Fort McMurray, were sitting in churches probably, some of them, singing hymns, saying prayers, receiving the Eucharist, having no idea that within 24 hours the world in which they lived was about to change dramatically. That they would become homeless, without much in the way of resources or clothing, that they would find themselves in somebody's guest room or a hotel room or sleeping with 2 or 3 other 100 families in a gymnasium, lining up for food, lining up for clothing, lining up for assistance, lining up perhaps to use the washrooms or the showers. Horrific turnaround. And yet, absolutely intelligible in today's world, even though we don't like to believe how capricious and how fleeting may be the lives that we live and enjoy. And so I think about the message in today's gospel, because I think actually it's a powerful one. And I think when you think about it, it's a world-changing message. Jesus asks the Father that those who are with him, the disciples of the moment, and for those who will come to faith through the words of those disciples who are with him for the moment, that they too will live in him and he in them, just as he lives in the Father and the Father lives in him. That relationship, which is love, should extend not simply to his friends and associates, but to the friends and associates of the friends of the associates, and so on through time. And you know, when we look at the incredibly generous response of Canadians, not only to refugees in distant places, but to those who live here amongst us, we can see an attitude that's very, very different than the world's attitude might have been to homeless refugees, hungry people, people without shelter 2,000 years ago. And that's important, I think, because it's through the efforts of many generations that we have come to an understanding of what Jesus is really all about. He is about the power of love, the power of God's love, to change us, to change others, to change the world, to make the world a more caring, generous, loving, concerned, compassionate place. And the gospel of Jesus is a big part of that change in our culture and in our civilization, and indeed in our world. And it's not exclusively Christian thing. We need to acknowledge that the compassion with which Jesus spoke is rooted in his own faith tradition, in the tradition of the Jewish faith. That his influence in the world in which he lived and his story and his teaching have a home in the Quran. That regardless of people's individual faith commitments or cultural traditions, love is something that transcends all of those things. Compassion transcends all of those things. And it seems to me that's what Jesus is talking about when he's talking about God's love being in him and in his followers, and his followers existing in God's love. And we have so many options as we sit here in our hopefully comfortable lives today. We have so many opportunities through the Red Cross, through the Primates World Relief and Development Fund, in all kinds of different ways to help, to make a difference, to in fact witness to the love of God in Jesus Christ in our lives, but to the world around us. And it seems to me there is a powerful message about our calling as a people in the events that we've seen. In the last few months, our country has become home to 25,000 people who were refugees somewhere else. And now we're being called, just as surely as we were then, to attend to people who become refugees in our own country. And it's a powerful witness to the influence of people of faith that so much is happening so quickly. I would encourage you this week to hold the people of Alberta, in particular the firefighters and the rescue workers and the first responders who are attending to the immediate needs of people there. Pray for them. Pray that God will give them the strength to continue to reflect in the world the love and the care of God for others. Pray for the evacuees as they struggle to come to terms with life-altering circumstances. And to pray that they will see that the love of God is actually there. Not in the disaster, not in the forest fire, but in the response of everyone else to their circumstance and their situation. That indeed every time someone hands out a meal or a piece of clothing or an insurance check or gives directions or cares for someone's pet or welcomes someone into their home, that there is the love of God in flesh, incarnate in our world today. So please pray and please consider the needs of our fellow human beings wherever they are in God's world. Amen.